be able to interoperate and be able to bring about some new applications for the mobile workforce, probably some things we haven't even dreamed of yet in terms of what can be done when the mobility and the broadband and the speeds get to the same rates that we have today on wired networks. And I would suggest to you that this sort of revolution in mobility is critically important, because when our kids enter the workforce, they're going to expect the mobility and the interoperability to be there. And I think that it will unleash a whole nother generation of creative thinkers. So we're excited to have this together. I'm going to introduce Mr. Jeff Rosenblatt, who's the Vice President of Constellation Incorporated. Jeff's a good friend of AFCEA and has been working with me and the committee for several years now in pulling together some key panels and key speakers and high-level executives to participate. With that, I will turn the show over to Jeff Rosenblatt.
Thank you, Jim. Really appreciate the opportunity to be in front of you all today. And I was here most of this week listening to a lot of the panels, and I was actually kind of encouraged by, the theme of the panel is all about how to do more without more. And as a result of that, people are looking at the mobility aspect as a key solution for being able to do more without more. So I have a great panel to offer you all tonight, and wanted to just start off with a kind of a little bit of a setup for what we're going to talk about. And I'll start that out with a brief story. My experience with the wireless community goes all the way back, actually before cellular. And for those that were around back then, cellular, wireless, which is what it's called today, the mobility, was really all about having a phone in your car. And we all had those big phones that got mounted in our trunks, or then they came out with these transportable, what they called bag phones. I was so excited when I had one of those. And my first kind of epiphany about this was, unfortunately back then, we weren't really leading the world in wireless communications. The Scandinavians were. Ericsson, Nokia were some of the key players back then, and I had the good fortune of going to Sweden very early on, and back then, our cellular industry was largely around cars. And I went there, and the first thing I noticed when I was out one night in the parks of Sweden, there was this group of like teenage kids, and they were all sitting around talking to each other, and they all had these small little cell phones. Half of them were talking to each other, and half of them were talking to other people on their cell phones. And I was like, wow, I've never seen anything like this before. All these kids are talking to each other, and they're talking to everyone else. They're not even paying attention to the people that they're in that group. And it was kind of like my first epiphany, because I never even thought of wireless in that context. And I think that is kind of where we are today with some of the things that this panel is going to talk about. There's been some legislation that's just gotten passed, perfect timing for this panel. About a week ago, signed into law from Obama. It's been in the works forever. And what it's going to do is it's going to really fund a wireless broadband communications capability for public safety, first responders, basically those that really kind of provide support to us. It's finally happening. It had some fits and starts. What I found that was interesting is that Morgan O'Brien, who founded Nextel years and years ago, he was the first one that really started pushing the envelope on it, and announced that he had ideas on building out this wireless broadband network for public safety. And at that time, there was a lot of pushback, and the pushback actually came from the very people that would benefit from it, the public safety community. And it was only because they really never sat around and thought about that in that kind of a context. And they always thought something was lurking behind the corner that they didn't know about. But it actually kind of flipped a light switch, and they really started thinking about it, and it really kind of changed what their thinking was and how this could really help support and change their operating model, public safety, for being able to kind of provide their support. And so just in the same way that I saw, God, I guess it's 20 years ago, how teenage kids, not to equate teenage kids with public safety, but how teenage kids all of a sudden showed me that, wow, this wireless communications can actually serve a totally different purpose than what we were originally thinking. I think public safety has come around to thinking of how this is actually going to change their world. And so I'm going to go ahead and start introducing my panel here one by one, and I'm going to start off with Richard Mirgon, and he's one of the past presidents of APCO, which is one of the key associations for public safety. And he's got over 30 years of experience, with the last 20 years in public safety technology field. He's the immediate past president of the Association of Public Safety Officials International, APCO. He's been the lead on the Public Safety Alliance, which advocated for the reallocation of the D block spectrum to public safety. He recently retired as the Director of Technology Services for Douglas County, Nevada, held that position since 1991. And so, with that, I'm going to turn the podium over to Richard.
Thank you, sir. Again, my name is Dick Mirgon. I'm past president of APCO International. And before we get into the slides, I'd like to set the stage here a little bit. Public safety has some very unique needs when it comes to voice communications and data. And to try and sum it up, imagine this, that you've got a fireman in a building, a police officer, where shots are fired, and they grab the land mobile radio and they push it, they can talk instantly. A guy in a burning building can call for help, and they can send in people to help extract him. A police officer can help deploy stuff. But within a typical commercial network and cellular today, it's not instant communications. We've all been in cases to where you have dropouts in a cellular network, and it's not to be critical of our cellular network. It just wasn't designed for what public safety does, which is why we're so unique. That when a paramedic is working on that person with that has collapsed, and he doesn't know what's wrong with him, and he needs help from that doctor in the hospital, video and telemetry is critical to saving that person's life, and that video and telemetry has to be now. It has to be instantaneous, has to be a high quality. So that's the foundation of what caused us as public safety to move forward and look at building our own public safety broadband network that will also encompass what we call mission critical voice. And mission critical voice is that ability to push that button and I now talk to whoever I need to talk to without delay. So the public, and please bear with me, I've got about 7.5 minutes to get through these slides, and I'm going to go through them quickly because I believe the questions you folks have are more important than my synopsis of what this legislation was and who the Public Safety Alliance was. Public Safety Alliance came together about 3 years ago. It was made up of all the major public safety associations. Once we came together, we then engaged some of the other associations here in DC, like National Government Association, NACO, League of Cities, who all became partners in this effort to move the bill forward. The basic principles we had as the Public Safety Alliance was that spectrum was our first and foremost important thing, that without spectrum we couldn't build. We needed funding, but absent funding, if we had spectrum, we'd find the funding somewhere else. And with spectrum and funding, you need good governance. Because why we have failed in public safety interoperability is because lack of a good governance model. When you look at jurisdictions which have disparate radio systems, it's because they couldn't get along and talk to each other. And that's why governance became critical to this effort. HR 3630, Title 6, gave us all these things. It gave us the governance we need. It gave us $7 billion of funding to build this network. It gave us $2.5 billion worth of spectrum, another 10 megahertz. One of the things I need to point out is public safety has 10 megahertz of broadband spectrum. All the engineering, technical people, we've got about 1,000 pages of reports talking about you need a 10 by 10 network to operate, which is why the D block became so critical. A couple of the other elements in the bill is that there is $135 million for state implementation for them to do planning, and it provides $300 million to NIST to do the research, because it became critical that we had a centralized place to say, here is how you develop the standards, and here's what public safety has to use. We don't want to have disparate networks in the future. We need some leadership from the federal government. The allocation of the D block is taking the 10 that I had before, and will create a single license. The single license will be then issued to the First Responder Network Authority, or so aptly named FirstNet. Technical Advisory Board for First Responder Interoperability. The FCC will be putting together an advisory board here in the next couple of weeks to help set some of those initial technical standards. You see there on the slides the timelines I have to establish this in. It's quick, it's fast, it's not intended to be the final answer. It's intended to be the starting point, that there has to be a common ground that everybody starts on, and that's what the FCC will be doing. FirstNet. The FirstNet Governing Board will be 15 members. It will include federal representation, state and local, three who have been public safety professionals, and 6 others. There'll be a need for people with technical experience, network experience, and financial. We have said from day one that this governing board cannot be just public safety. We don't know how to build a national network, and we can't do this alone. We have said from day one that we have to do it together, and we being the private sector, the federal government, state and local, it's going to take everybody involved to get this done and to get it right. There are the duties and responsibility. Bottom line is, it is an autonomous group that will have the authority to work on standards, set up agreements, work with the states, because of state rights that they have to have their input into the process. And rightfully so, the FirstNet board needs to engage the states. The states know better than anybody where they need coverage, how the coverage works in their state. One of the frustrations I have in Nevada is sometimes dealing with people here on the East Coast, whether people typically involved in grants. We had one dispute a while back. Guy was saying, we're only going to allocate you $500 to send a technician to this radio site. And we're saying, but it takes, X amount of hours. We need 4 times that amount of money. Well, we looked on the map. It's 20 miles away. Yeah, but 18 of those miles is straight up on a rocky path, and most of the time you have to take a helicopter to get there. I mean, so there's a lot of perception that maybe one part of the country has over another, that you need that expertise locally to make this work. Again, some other duties of the FirstNet. Funding, allocation of the funds. $7 billion will be deposited in the Public Safety Trust Fund. How that's broken out is $2 billion will come up first. The other money will come in after the auction has occurred. NTIA will establish $135 million state and local implementation fund for those of you who do engineering consulting, governance consulting. There's clearly going to be a lot of money out there for people to assist the states in helping to build these plans. State and local responsibilities. One of the nuances here is that the FirstNet board will issue RFPs, competitive RFPs for the states. One of the concerns was that there was to not be one RFP to build this network, that each state would have their own. And part of it is, again, this is a big job. You can't just give it to one company to build. You need everybody involved. So maybe Motorola would be the prime in one state, with AT&T in another, Verizon, Sprint, Harris. So again, it was to engage everybody. The interesting component in there, though, is a state may opt out. That a state, if they feel that the national RFP doesn't meet their needs, that there's a process for them to opt out of that national RFP process. If they choose to, they actually submit their plan to the FCC, and part of the reason for that is that the folks on the Hill felt that the FCC was a good third party. That if I'm trying to opt out, why submit my kind of proposal to the FirstNet board who wrote their RFP, because they're going to have some probably proprietary feelings towards their work. And so the FCC would be a third party. So from a public safety point of view, we felt that was some very good language. Research and development. We get back to what I was commenting on earlier, that NIST will be conducting research and development. There will be initially $100 million. There has to be somebody who takes the lead on helping public safety build standards. The example is we have not only agreed to, we have asked that we be required to build LTE network. LTE is the same standard that AT&T and Verizon, everybody's building on. That will reduce our cost. It'll make it easier to be interoperable. But within that, we do have unique needs, like the push-to-talk feature, the mission critical. That is not part of the standards at this point. Somebody's got to take the lead with the standard-setting bodies to represent public safety nationally, and that will be part of NIST's role in this project. Again, more to the duties and responsibilities. There is a 911 grant program in there. It's $115 million to help build out some of the next generation 911. Again, part of this is the vision. It shouldn't stand alone from this. We're going to be building a lot of backbone, a lot of interconnectivity. There's a requirement on the FirstNet side to connect with communication centers. There's a 911 need. This should holistically all come together. Again, not only is it beneficial to us as first responders, it's financially a better way to go about things. Why build two disparate networks when you really have a robust network that does both? Who can use this network? One of the things that I thought would be interesting for this group is how the law looks at the users of the network. And what it says is that it's a public safety network for public safety services, that the public safety services are as defined in 337 and the Homeland Security Act. It's kind of an interesting point. Public safety tends to be very protective of 337. 337's, go to the next slide here, which says it's local, state and local government only. That there has been a historical feeling that it's my spectrum, that I don't want somebody else to use it. And it's because there's been so little of it that nobody wanted it watered down, nobody wanted other people encroaching on that spectrum. We fight amongst ourselves enough for spectrum. What changes here is that when you've got 20 megs of broadband and you've got the 700 narrowband, that is a lot of spectrum. This is the first time in history we have had significant blocks of spectrum to build a network. So the additional language in there was the Homeland Security Act. And as you can see on that, it refers to federal, state, and local. So it really expanded that a little bit, and it expanded because we asked for it. Those of us at the PSA who provide the leadership of it, those days of fighting over what's mine and yours and have got to end. This has got to be a holistic approach. And I said it earlier, and I can't say it enough. We have to do this together. There's only one way that this gets built, and that's if we all partner together and move it forward. And to kind of paraphrase our vice president, this is a big deal. $7 billion is a lot of money to build network and to move this forward. Thank you.
Thanks, Dick, and nice job getting through all those slides that quickly. You did it. So now we've heard from really kind of the public safety, national public safety kind of viewpoint, and so their feelings about some of this. And now we're going to move kind of what happens behind the scenes, on the policy and regulatory side. And Dan Phython is going to be our next speaker, and he's been working in and around this for quite some time. And I think, as Dick pointed out, perhaps one of the key aspects of this is the governance process, and a lot of what Dan does, as part of the legislation and then subsequent to the legislation, all involves around what's going to happen with all that governance. Dan he right now is the division chief for policy planning and analysis for the Department of Homeland Security's Office of Emergency Communications. As a division chief there, Dan's responsible for leading OEC's policy and grant efforts to improve emergency communications capabilities nationwide, including direction and implementation of the department's efforts to build a nationwide public safety broadband network. Prior to his work at OEC, Dan served a number of key communications roles, including Chief of the FCC's Wireless Telecommunications Bureau and Director of the FCC's Ledge Affairs. So, Dan?
Thank you. I'm going to, Stacy, if I may, and I think we're all hoping for a, keep our remarks short and have an interactive session with you, deal with questions and what have you. And I don't want to make you or my panelists think that, okay, we all got to start off with what's our gravitas, cred, how long have we been involved in this? But I mean, part of what I want to communicate through what I'm about to say is how big a deal this is, and I'm a policy wonk. I've been at this for 30 years now. I'm 55. I got 10 more years in the game probably, and I can tell you at the end of 10 years, about the time the General Accountability Office is going to do a report to Congress on how well has this thing worked that Congress passed, at that point, I'm going to look back, I want to look back and say this is the thing that I'm most proud of in my career. And yeah, so I was at the FCC and in terms of, one of the, you look for where you're going to make a difference, how do you make a difference, and one of the things that gave me a thrill when I was chief of the FCC's Wireless Bureau, and you wonder, it's like, oh man, you're just besieged by these guys, everybody. But I remember one time walking out, this is the old FCC headquarters down on M Street, and the Wireless Bureau was actually in one of what they called the satellite buildings, and those who didn't know better thought, oh man, you're outside, you're not in the main building, you're away from the action. And trust me, it was good to be away from the action, because when I would go to the headquarters building and I would try and, for every one thing I got rid of on my agenda, I got 10 more. It was like walking through, lint collected, stickies, it's like, so, but there I am walking out one day, sort of wondering, is any of this stuff we're doing matter? And literally the first 3 people I saw on the streets all were on cellular phones, and that was good, first 3 people. But even better was none of them was wearing a suit, man or woman. There was a guy, with blue collar, literally, with his name stitched over his pocket, cell phone. Same thing. None of them were wearing a suit, and I thought, man, if it is getting to that, non-professional user, we're making a difference. So, little things like that. But I mean, policy wonk. In an office of DHS that you guys have probably never heard of, and while I should care, I don't. I don't care if you've heard of us, but I'm literally what my team and we are so excited in terms of our job at the wonderful present we have been given. I mean, I'm a kid, it's Christmas morning and I got a pony and I am so excited. This is, in my 30 years of doing this, there is more opportunity here for these guys and all he represents, and these guys and all they represent, and if you, no matter what you are doing right now, if you can't figure out opportunities in this bill, you go to your doctor right now, because, and it may be your MD or it may be your shrink, because there's either something wrong with you don't have a pulse, or there's something wrong up here. I mean, this is gold. I mean, I can tell you, we got the best possible bill we could get. I'm telling people, we got it 6 months in advance of when I thought we would get it, and it is a darn good package. Is it perfect? Heck no. But the challenge and the opportunity for all of us is to make this thing work. Again, 10 years from now, when I'm about to go in a rocking chair somewhere, or 10 years from now when Congress is looking at GAO and saying, how is this thing working? That is the challenge and the opportunity. We have been given $7 billion. We have been given 20 megahertz of beachfront property. And we have been given a governance structure, yes, that can make it work. If we all do it. And you guys, again, no matter who you represent, if you are, trust me, if you are representing a federal user, as Dick said, who now has access to this, you have no idea how hard people worked, to ensure that you would have that access, but also that, in effect, the feds would not, in effect, take it over, that this is going to be a common asset usable for the public good, and with partnership opportunities across stuff that we have not even yet dreamed of. So I'm going to stop here. As I say, I literally can't sleep at night because of just mining the opportunities in this bill. So all I'm going to do is stop here and say, sort of behind the scenes, that ducks in big bills never look like they're serenely paddling. They look like they're about to drown at many points. But underneath the surface of that duck, there are a lot of people like us in collaboration with colleagues, across the interagency who were working behind the scenes to make this happen. Some of us are probably really sick of each other. We probably know each other better than our spouses do at this point. But, I mean, NTIA, FCC, as appropriate to an independent regulatory agency, Department of Justice. We were working with, the vice president basically designated one of his best and smartest people, to make sure we stayed on task. And so we have instantaneously shifted from, doing our best to get the best possible bill passed to now we are shifting to the same collaboration across many, many agencies to make this thing work. We are doing what, as a taxpayer, as a policy observer, as academics out there, for years said, geez, if only the feds could get their act together. We did. Perfect? No. Is this bill perfect? No. But that's the challenge and the opportunity. So I'm going to stop here. But I am so jazzed at this. And again, whatever you are doing now or whatever you want to do tomorrow, if you can't figure out that this is pure gold, as I say, go check with your doctor.
All right, so if you don't think this is a big deal, I mean, when's the last time that you saw a veteran federal employee that excited, particularly one involved with legislation in his job? I mean, I always thought that legislation is like negotiation and everybody leaves the table equally unhappy. Clearly, that is not the case with Dan.
It is this. This is the perfect metaphor. For however you approach life, half full, half empty. Whatever it is, I tell you, Congress gave us a glass that was filled up as much as it could be filled. Our job is to keep that process going and make it work.
Okay, so now we have two more presenters. We kind of heard from public safety. We heard a little bit from the policy side. We're going to talk with one of the leaders of AT&T and of Verizon Wireless to kind of get that perspective from kind of the commercial wireless side, which is leading a lot of the the industry, frankly, in wireless communications. So, and then we'll go to questions after that. So first, I want to introduce Don Brittingham, of Vice President of National Security and Public Safety Policy from Verizon Communications. And Don's the just said that, and he is, his role is to promote good public policies in the area of national security, emergency preparedness, public safety, as well as the company's support to the United States government in association with continuity of operations, continuity of government, and enduring constitutional government initiatives. Clearly, this is one of them. So, Don?
Thank you, Jeff, and good morning, everyone. I'm happy to be here. And let me start by recognizing and thanking both Dan and Dick for their efforts. Dan, you can't retire. You got a lot more work to do, so don't be looking too forward to retirement. And Dick, for you, I'm sure those of you who've been following this know this already, but I don't think we want this panel to end without somebody saying, recognizing Dick for his efforts. I mean, there are a lot of people, as Dan has noted, who've been involved in this process over the last several years, trying to make this happen within government, within industry, but it's been a core group of public safety professionals that have been leading the charge, and Dick is one of them. So, Dick, thanks for your efforts. As a citizen of the country, I appreciate it. And as a representative of Verizon, I appreciate it. What I want to do this morning is kind of focus on really two things, and then, as Dan said, get to questions. Am I hitting the green arrow?
Yes.
Okay, good. So the first thing I want to note is that I think what's important here is not so much that first responders are going to have better, more reliable communications. I mean, that is certainly true, and that maybe was the the main impetus for moving in this direction. But I think what we have with this bill is much more important than that. I mean, it is really about providing first responders and anyone, frankly, engaged in emergency communications with an entirely new framework for the future and their communications, so that, frankly, they can leverage all the wonderful things that are going on in industry and with these new next-generation technologies that hopefully all of you in the room already take advantage of today. And as Jeff noted, most of our children take advantage of it too. So it's really making sure that they no longer are hampered with limited resources, limited money, limited spectrum, limited ways in which they can use technology, but making sure that they can leverage all those things. And frankly, no different than any government agency, no different than any enterprise business in this country. And most of them are, taking advantage of that today. So it's really about meeting those needs in a way that allows them to expand the capabilities they get, making sure that they can leverage innovation just like the rest of the citizens of the country can. Doing that through partnerships with the private sector, which I'm going to speak more directly about in a few minutes. And making sure that they have solutions that are oriented toward their needs, their very specific needs. And there's a huge ecosystem out there in the communications industry that's been evolving for years, and making sure that public safety has access to that and that it evolves in a way that meets their emerging needs is critical. And obviously driving new products for public safety. There are a lot of discussion these days about cloud computing and machine-to-machine and all sorts of things, which the private sector and certainly businesses, are very much focused on. We need to make sure that the public safety community and all the first responder community can tap into that as well. Now, let me just spend a minute focusing a little bit about innovation, because really it is that ecosystem that I think we need to make sure that public safety is plugged into. I'm sure all of us are well aware of all the great things, all the app stores and all of the great things you can do with wireless technology today. But we need to make sure that that ecosystem evolves in a way that addresses public safety needs. I think a program that really the Commission certainly has promoted and that Verizon has embraced, others have as well, is the notion of open development. The idea of ensuring that regardless of the network that that a customer is on, that there are ways for them to get access to applications, devices, services that can meet their needs, and to create an environment in which those that are developing those devices and applications can have the assurance that there will be a marketplace for them. I know Jeff has cautioned me not to be too much of a promotion about Verizon, but I'll inject a few things here and there. From our standpoint, we've been very much focused on promoting innovation, in particular with the LTE network. We have actually two LTE innovation centers that we've established, one in Massachusetts and one in California, where we have specifically set up a framework to allow and invite developers in so that they can focus on developing applications across many sectors, certainly not just public safety communications, energy management, healthcare, and the like. So providing that kind of a seed to promote that type of work we think is critical, and certainly is going to be critical in the communications, in the public safety communications segment. I'm going to skip over this next slide in the interest of time. And the thing that I want to focus probably most of my comment on, and hopefully you all can read the slide well enough, in my view, one of the key principles that's in the legislation, and frankly, this is a concept that the FCC initiated, and I give them the lion's share of the credit here, several years ago. It certainly was prominent in the National Broadband Plan that they published, but frankly, it was a concept that they focused on even prior to that. And that's the idea, and I think Dick and Dan have both touched on it already, of ensuring that this network is built not just, that public safety has to do it on its own, but they have viable partnerships that they can create with the private sector to make sure it's done effectively. And back to my comment about the ecosystem, I mean, obviously, setting up these kind of partnerships is one of the main things that's going to allow them to take advantage of that. But it's even more than that. It's about making the best use of that $7 billion. $7 billion sounds like a lot of money. It is a lot of money. But in the context of building a national network for public safety, it's frankly nowhere near enough money. So you really need to rely on ways in which you can stretch a dollar as much as possible, partnering with those who've already invested significant amounts of money in a communications infrastructure. Certainly companies like Verizon, AT&T, Sprint, T-Mobile, the whole industry, I think, is going to benefit from this and can provide assistance to Dan and Dick and the government in this effort. Looking for ways to integrate the public safety network in some way with those commercial networks and those commercial investments is really the key in my mind. Sharing infrastructure, making sure that where the public safety network isn't available yet, commercial networks are ready to provide the support that's needed, so you have a complete seamless integration of the two, using the same technology. Roaming agreements, priority services, so that when a first responder has to use a commercial network, they know that they have priority treatment in the process. Developing devices, applications, things that obviously in many cases are going to be very similar to the commercial applications and devices we all know, but in many cases they're going to be different because they have different needs. And I'll just end it, again, I'll end it with a little promo. I mean, certainly, if it's not already understood, Verizon believes in these types of partnerships very much. It's been almost 2 years now that we announced an alliance with Motorola to actually try to push this type of a model forward and try to provide assistance to those states and cities that had already begun to go down this road as early adopters. Looking at ways in which we can make sure that these public safety and commercial networks are fully interoperable, devices are available, and so forth. So I will end it at that and turn it over to Jim.
Thanks, Don. Let me introduce Jim and appreciate his late replacement into the panel, although he was kind of an interim attendee at one point. But Jim is the Assistant Vice President for Public Safety and Homeland Security for AT&T. He's responsible for federal policy and strategic planning on the public safety, homeland security, cybersecurity matters, and emergency preparedness. And he's a member of a multitude of boards that support this industry. There's too many of them to read, and I'll just turn it over to Jim.
Thank you very much, and I appreciate the opportunity. I too want to take the opportunity to thank Dick and Dan. Dan, I think, clearly represented just what a big deal this is, but I'd just like to springboard off. This is the single largest or single most important development in public safety communications in 70+ years. And it took the vision of people like Dan and Dick to realize that we were at a unique moment in time in this country. For the first time ever, there was the opportunity to get nationwide harmonized spectrum in a bandwidth that would support broadband technology, that at the same time a large portion of the commercial carriers were working on the same air interface, and the rollout was happening near the same time frame. A very, very unique point in our history. And it took the vision and leadership to go out and ask Congress to actually change its course and how it had allocated spectrum and how it was funding public safety, and to go and change that. There were obviously many that did not believe it could be done, that said it would never be done, and it got done. But it is it's really satisfying, as Dan has said and Dick has said, that we actually were able to take this opportunity, because if this opportunity had passed, we would never have the opportunity probably in our lifetime to have nationally harmonized spectrum and the opportunity to build on a nationwide basis like this. So again, my appreciation to the leadership of public safety, DHS, the FCC, NTIA. Dan said you probably haven't heard of his office or Office of Emergency Communications, but if you haven't, you may want to go and find out who they are, because they are taking a major role in this and have provided tremendous leadership over the last couple of years in this area. I would like to also just kind of springboard off of what previous speakers have said and what Don has said. This is the spirit and intent of this legislation is to provide public safety federal users with the best communications capabilities, the current communications capabilities. Many times during this entire debate, witness after witness would parade before Congress and say, it is just unacceptable that a 16-year-old on the street has better communications technology than the firefighter or police officer on the street. And that was just echoed throughout this entire debate. And this is the opportunity to give those first responders the frontline technology to use, the bandwidth to use for the many applications that are out there and are going to be developed in the future to protect and save lives. And as Don said, a very important part of that is leveraging off the existing and future investment that's being made by public and private organizations across the country in communications. As Don said, to go and build this thing from scratch would cost a lot more than $7 billion. But if it utilizes the existing investments being made by all carriers, all providers, all ISPs across the country, you're going to be able to do it far more cost effectively, far faster, and far more efficiently. So I'm going to, always a danger when presenting somebody else's slides, but here we go. So basically, if you look at the slide, this is a kind of a visual representation of what a public safety broadband network could look like. You know, you have the radio access network. That could be 100 radio access networks or 1,000 radio access networks out there. You have regional data centers placed throughout the country. They of course would have to be they're distance sensitive, so they have to be close to a lot of the traffic. And then you have a core. And if you look at this, you could look at this model and say, well, that's really what that is that's a private network. That's an enterprise network. Well, that's exactly what it is. It is an enterprise network. If you look at that model, you could look at that and say, that's the UPS system. That's the FedEx system. Basically, it is leveraging all those assets while at the same time being very responsive to public safety's needs and government's needs by, if you look down at the bottom, you have the LAN access, which gives the public safety entity its ability to manage and to groom what it wants in terms of governance of that network. You can also see it's walled off from the internet so that it is a private network. So there's a whole bunch of benefits to this, and the enterprise core network provides trusted internet connections and a suite of shared services to various components, divisions, and departments within the enterprise. This is not dissimilar to 1VA, DHS OneNet, or DoD InterNet. The radio access network, state, local, tribal, are similar to divisions within large enterprise. No separate islands like legacy mobile networks. Just going back to the fact that public safety is making this huge leap from narrowband communications into broadband communications, and they need to leverage the expertise and the capabilities that are out there in order to make those steps. And that's the public-private partnership that Don discussed. That AT&T and others. We've done this. We know how to do this, and we're willing in taking these assets and leveraging them. There's so much more we can do in the radio access network with logical and physical separation, and in the core network and the transport networks. And this meets the requirements of both public safety and federal users, that they want the security, they want the control, but yet at the same time, they want the 5 nines reliability. Again, just taking the opportunity to do some AT&T advertising here. If you look at the network, a backbone network, we have an OC 768 crosses the nations millions of times. This is an example of how public safety and the federal users can leverage the existing assets in the ground by all the providers. And getting to the issue that Dick was talking about a little bit in procurement, you know, one of the things that we've seen is that each municipality doesn't have to go out and reinvent the wheel. The federal government has done a tremendous amount with the federal procurement process for IT network managed services. And using existing GSA enterprise IT networking procurement models like Networks Universal and Networks Enterprise, the FirstNet authority can actually go and leverage off those models and be able to speed the process. Again, part of the challenge here is not only to get it built, but to get it built quickly. Leveraging commercial business support systems like order provisioning, portal tools, SIM and device handling, deployment management tools, trouble ticketing, VPN, encryption, middleware, commercial framework, frame relay, custom IP addressing, APNs, custom billing feeds and options, and service quality management and SLAs. Those are all things that can be universally applied across all the contracting entities, which will speed deployment, leverage the existing investment. The other thing that needs to be kind of highlighted here is that while we've had this discussion about public safety, that if you look across the economy and look across especially the state and local governments, they're making these types of investments in health IT networks, education networks, energy networks. A lot of this investment it can go parallel, and I think that was one of the huge factors in the broad success that the PSA and public safety had in getting such a wide constituency of interest and their success in Congress, that a lot of the state IT and CTOs understood that you look at this enterprise network design, and this is what we're doing a lot, and we can leverage this and really help deploy broadband, especially broadband into areas that are unserved at this point. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. I think you can see that the immense amount of technology that's already out there, that's already been deployed, that's already available for public safety. You see the kind of the enthusiasm and excitement that kind of is living in and around the legislation that's been passed, and then with Dick, you can see that there's been a kind of a long process in trying to make this happen, and public safety, federal users are really behind all this. And so you throw in $7 billion with matching funds from the state and local, and there's going to be a lot of things happening over the next 10 years. And I think we all want to make sure that when Dan looks back 10 years from now, that he's just as excited then as he is today. So now we're going to move into the Q&A side of it, and some people have been sending some questions in, and I have some questions as well. We'll start with some of the questions that have been asked wirelessly, actually, into the panel. So one of the questions, and I think that Jim touched on it a little bit in his last presentation, but this as well as an ongoing theme that we've heard this week, and that's the topic of security. And so what we're talking about here is a national network. It's IP-based. It's for public safety. What are the thoughts from the panel on how security concerns will be addressed? Probably one of the carrier.
Go ahead.
Well, I'll start. No, absolutely, security is a critical issue, and I guess I would look at it from two perspectives. One, and Jim alluded to this earlier, that And not that I would necessarily view it as a closed system by any means, because certainly we would expect first responders to need access to the internet. But it needs to be treated very differently, this network, than a commercial network would normally be. I mean, there are going to be reasons why you need to have, firewalls and, various protections in place to secure access to the network, and frankly, to secure access to data that's available on the network for different types of users. So from that perspective, security is going to be critical. And I think there have been groups already looking at this. I mean, the FCC set up an advisory group a couple of years ago, and that's done a lot of good work and has identified some of the things that need to be done in that area. And then from a broader perspective, obviously, we all know about the focus on cybersecurity generally in this country, and the importance of addressing that effectively on this network is even more important than on any other network. So. Much work has been done within DHS in partnership with the private sector and others, and other parts, obviously, of the federal government. And so we need to ensure that we can translate those experiences and over to this network, and make sure that as FirstNet lays out the plans for the network, that they have the right expertise and they have a plan that includes the proper ways to address cybersecurity.
And if I can add on to that, I think, this brings some unique challenges in that we're dealing with states, and states have their own laws and their own way of dealing with information. We've got HIPAA, we're dealing with criminal justice information. We have just got an abundance of regulations that we have to deal with that still have yet to be sorted out. So I think there's going to be innovation here. And I have said that what we have done moving this legislation was probably the single heaviest hurdle. However, the volume of work in front of us is just tremendous in trying to resolve these issues and figure out how do you deal with a Wyoming law that only certain information can be moved over certain types of links, where in other states it's different with federal requirements. Again, I don't see it as a problem. I see it as an opportunity. Because at the end of the day, we will have a more secure network and a better America at the end of it.
My one-word answer to how we're going to address that is collaboratively. I mean, again, I think the old way, the old model, the reason why this is such an opportunity, as Dick alluded to, the old model for public safety was you silo. You have your own infrastructure, and by God, it's not going to touch anybody else's because of security risks, and obviously legitimately so. But again, to take advantage of the opportunities afforded by this type of structure, yeah, there are new challenges, and again, we've barely begun to scratch the surface. But I would also say we're going to do it as smartly as we can. So yes, we are. I mean, the office that I'm in that you've never heard of, we are aligned with some other components in DHS, and one of those is the National Cybersecurity Division. And even before this legislation passed, our office was told, you work with these guys, and then, we have assets that we intend to bear to help solve this problem in a collaborative environment. And the other thing, we're going to do it smartly. We are not going to reinvent the wheel. We're going to build on stuff that is already out there because, yes, $7 billion, as you said, is not nearly enough to tackle this challenge. So we're not going to waste, effort and time and good work that's already been done. So again, in my, I'm the kid at Christmas. One of my other desires is to prove to people out there who think, your typical federal bureaucrat, me, that we can't walk and chew gum at the same time. But this is an opportunity. We've already demonstrated that we can, and we intend to demonstrate that we will. So again, opportunities, challenges, part and parcel of what we've been given.
Yeah, it's a unique opportunity to address security. In this country, what is cybersecurity? Obviously, the ISPs work on we are constantly working on cybersecurity, and actually do a very good job at it. But what's unfortunately happened is that what have we done with cybersecurity? We've made everybody who owns a PC a network administrator, right? And what's your way to solving botnets? Well, re-image your computer. So while, you know, as our CSO likes to say, he walks into his mother's house every now and then, and she's got a desktop that's just humming away, you know, attacking China because it's been, it's not been on a botnet, it's been attacked by a botnet. So the reality is that in this network, it is going to be very important very early on that the whole ecosystem, from the developers all the way down to the core network, that everybody is working on cybersecurity so that you don't have a state that has been captured and is attacking other states. I mean, those are the things you have to work on, as opposed to saying, well, it's just a core function. It's not. It's the entire ecosystem. And I think Dan and Dick have said, specifically Dan, they understand that it needs to be, you know, from beginning to end, and we can't create the vulnerabilities that we have right now.
Good. So a bunch of other questions we received here. One of them also expressed an interest in your tie, Dan.
But can I trace that back to one of my colleagues?
But while we're with you, Dan, so someone also wanted to know, there's kind of a two-part question. One is for you, Dan, and one actually I think could go beyond and would actually have a kind of strong interest from others, but what is the role OEC will play kind of in this process? Yeah. And then the second kind of part of the question is, there's an interest in kind of wanting to understand what the expected auction process that will occur and what impact that's going to have.
What role will OEC play? Our role, this bill, again, huge opportunity. So this is our, frankly, our existing mission writ large. If you look at the legislation on its face, there's a lot that talks to NTIA. There's a lot that talks to the FCC. There's a lot, obviously, that talks to this new FirstNet Authority and its board. But sort of OEC's mission to date has been basically, you know, we have little direct authority, but we have the mission to get everybody working together to make it work. So we're going to continue that, as I said. So literally my charge from my bosses, you know, way up in DHS is basically, you know, you are to, in effect, go forward and you are to identify every possible, you know, DHS asset that can be brought to bear and work collaboratively, you know, with these guys and many more to make this thing work. Part of that is going to be, yes, $7 billion not enough. You know, we can't until that infrastructure addresses all of the mission critical capabilities that our stakeholders need. You know, we can't, you know, focus only on the shiny and new, my pony. We've got to keep, in the same way, working on making sure that the existing infrastructure continues to do its job until however many years down the road, this network is doing everything it is that we hope and believe it can do. So it's a lot of it is we're going to continue to do what we have been doing, but with this, it is, you know, such an injection of steroids into all of our ability to make this work. The second question, so how is the auctions process going to work? That's, yes, I mean, for, again, a lot of people out here, a lot of our stakeholders within DHS and elsewhere, yes, don't forget other parts of the bill that address, you know, the spectrum inventory, the possibility for further spectrum reallocations to continue to prime the auctions pump to fund not only this project, but you know, but others to continue to make spectrum resources available to, you know, these companies and hopefully many more can use in innovative and productive ways. So yes, challenges and opportunities there. But again, it's interesting, the dynamic from a, if you're a CIO in DHS or another federal agency, or if you're a user, you're thinking, you know, yeah, it's literally, it's, you know, I may lose my current assets the way they've been allocated, and Congress in effect saying maybe you should, in fact, because again, don't do it in a siloed way, do it in the collaborative way going forward. So there are going to be many more challenges / opportunities for current incumbents of spectrum that is under examination for either reallocation and reuse through the auctions process, or for further federal sharing with other users. So again, I mean, you're sick of hearing me talk about what a big thing this is, but truly, I mean, a number of years ago, a bunch of people representing all these people, and many more said, we've got to change the mindset to how we operate. It's not the best way to use spectrum resources. It's not the best way to invest taxpayers' money at the federal, state, local level. There's got to be a better way, and this is our opportunity to make that happen.
Good. So I think we have time for one more question, and there's one question here I think is pretty interesting. I'd like to hear maybe Dick kind of started off. But the question was all about, is there expected to be any kind of public safety center of excellence in and around kind of the ecosystem of LTE and staging to make it all work? And so I'm kind of interested kind of from the public safety side, what you kind of think about that kind of concept and where you see this notion kind of happening.
Yeah, I actually see it playing out in several different realms. There is plenty of authority within the law to set up advisory panels to support FirstNet, but there's a lot of expertise out there also, and part of this has to do with NIST and OEC. One of the things that OEC has excelled at over the last several years was bringing together state and local partners on governance and policy. And they've done a lot of work in that, and it's probably time that be maybe a little refocused and retuned. It is historically focused on LMR and other things, but there definitely creates an opportunity within NIST. NIST quite often brings people together on the technical piece of looking at the best technology. One of the things I see happening here is that Dick Mirgon's vision, strictly kind of off the top of my head the other day, is the question I was asked is, well, gee, are all the public safety users going to have access to the public switch telephone network? They're going to be able to dial a telephone. Well, yeah, okay, we had kind of thought about that. That's a pretty low priority for us, but I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people doing it, but how do you do that without getting into their business model? Okay, so we're in the process of looking at some of the standards. I think it's Rev 11 of LTE, one of the revs that's out there, and part of that has to be mission critical voice. But why not a technology that says, in the roaming agreements that we entered into with the carriers, that when they go to access the public switch telephone network, it's through that carrier at a billable rate? Because why would we want to have to build all that infrastructure since it already exists? Why can't it be smart enough that when it goes into an area that maybe the roaming agreement doesn't cover, it goes over its own network? So how do you do those things? So I think clearly within NIST, there's going to have to be a center of excellence to come up with these ideas, to advocate for those standards within the standard setting bodies. And then from FirstNet, I see that center of excellence dealing with how do you leverage all this network? I mean, there's a lot of towers being built. Public safety owns a lot. State of Nevada has its own fiber network, side to side, end to end. And just as put in perspective, Nevada's got 17 counties. Nye County is bigger than the state of Missouri. Now, I've had people come to Carson City and go, well, gee, I'd like to drive down to Vegas for the day. It's 500 miles. Nevada's a big state. So for us to have our own fiber network, so you leverage that network, you leverage what the carriers have built. Don't reinvent the wheel. And to do that, you need to have that center of excellence under FirstNet to look at the infrastructure that's in place, talk to the carriers and people who built it, and figure out what's the best way to use what we already have. So, yeah, I do see a lot of that coming about, but in different realms for different reasons.
There's some provisions in the bill for technology research and development too. And as commercial carriers, we certify everything that goes on the network. It's certified at the industry level through CTIA, and then we bring it into our own labs. And one of the things that could be done in this Center of Excellence with the development of technology is making sure that, obviously, that the devices and the operating systems comply with the interoperability requirements, aren't malicious. Number three is to make sure they're spectrally efficient, so that you actually get the best efficiency with what you're running on the network, and not trying to recapture after you've developed it. So there's a number of different things that actually this network can, springboard off of kind of what the commercial networks have had to do through necessity. Lessons learned. They can go right to the point where you want the thing to be spectrally efficient. You want it to hit the speeds. You want it to consume as little data as possible, make it very transmission efficient, and then second, most importantly, make sure it's a certifiable device.
Okay. Get the last word.
I don't want the last word, but again, challenge opportunity. I think the way I look at that is absolutely. We want in addition to needing to deal with the kids out there who are writing stuff that'll run on his colleague's mother's computer that may attack this new network, and we have to deal with the security issues. We want people out there now writing apps, not for silly games on the smartphones, but we want people out there writing public safety apps. And yeah, we're going to have to deal with all the challenges, interoperability across that. But again, this is, you name it. These are the opportunities that can be captured within this bill. So whether it's a center of excellence or whether it's, it's okay, work on designing the equivalent of the public safety network app store. You got your chance.
Thanks, Dan. And one kind of closing remark that I would like to make is that one word that was used earlier in terms of a solution is collaboration. And I think what you've seen in this panel is the collaboration on state, local, federal, and commercial aspects of this issue. And you can see this is leadership in each of those areas. They're all working together. That's what's going to make it ultimately work. And with that, I'd just like to thank the panel and appreciate all of your time.